Hi, everyone. Welcome to United Champions Daily Live. We've been talking about metacognition and the observer. And as we discussed, it's one of the most important skills, metacognition being the ability to think about our own thinking. And it makes every other skill that we've been learning through this program more effective. So today we will be talking about how do we develop metacognition and how can we strengthen our ability to observe thoughts without getting immersed in our thoughts. So what we tried and explored yesterday, that I don't have to believe every thought that I think. The moment I observe a thought, I've already created space between myself and the thought. So that's what we'll be again talking about through this week, learning and practicing together. So, as we do, we'll just start with an arrival practice so we can bring all of ourselves into the session today and also develop a closer relationship with the self. So, I invite you to settle into your seat, become comfortable. And for the next few minutes, simply just being with ourselves. Maybe taking few conscious breaths. So you also know what your breath feels like in this moment. And then I'll just give a few prompts to check in with yourself. And all you have to do is notice. We are not trying to change anything or to judge anything. We feel differently on different days, and everything that we are feeling perhaps is valid for how it is today. So, using these prompts only to develop more connection and more understanding, more vocabulary as well for the self. So, starting with how am I feeling physically today? Maybe for each of these, you can find two words that can describe the feeling. How am I feeling physically today? How am I feeling emotionally today? How am I feeling emotionally today? How am I feeling about myself today? How am I feeling about myself? And if you have a day lying ahead of you or an evening lying ahead of you, how am I feeling about the work waiting for me later? How am I feeling about the work waiting for me later? How am I feeling about the people I love? How am I feeling about the people I love? How am I feeling about the future at this moment? How am I feeling about the future at this moment? What has occupied most of my mind since I woke up? What has occupied most of my mind since I woke up? And the last one, what quality would I like to bring into this session? What quality would I like to bring into this session? And then again, just taking a few conscious breaths. And if you think about it, for each of the prompts, you could have had different feelings. So feelings would have changed from one prompt to the other. Thoughts would have changed. Maybe you felt very differently about one thing compared to the other. However, there was something which remained constant, which was the one doing the noticing. So you could feel a whole range of things. You could have different kinds of thoughts, which tells us that while thoughts can come and go and our feelings can change depending on how the situation is or what we are thinking about, we know that we have the capacity to be at times even objective about what is coming and going inside of us. So, depending on where we take our mind, it sort of starts thinking about that. And that should give us some confidence to be able to use this ability that we have um, to channelize our thoughts or focus our thoughts on what we want the brain to work on or how we want to respond to certain things. So now, yeah, beginning with really with the session today and things you want to explore about metacognition, starting with something I want you to think about is how many thoughts did you have today that say you didn't consciously choose? If you just had to sort of think about maybe a percentage or broadly uh, assessing what part of your thinking went into thoughts that you did not consciously choose. Most of our thinking happens automatically. So, this means that thoughts simply appear and we rarely decide what our next thought is going to be. We could be doing anything, we could be looking out the window and suddenly there's a thought and then there's another thought. And if you just go back to how the thought started, you would realize that um, it really it's so open. The mind can just bring up anything. Vardini says, yeah, definitely about 80% of the time, which is true. Most of our thoughts we are not choosing consciously. They're just coming into our minds. And again, yeah, when we go back and we trace the root of it, we would realize that we started very differently. And some trigger, some thought, some visual just takes us into another world or just another line of thinking. So we rarely decide what our next thought will be. Yet we can assume that because a thought appears, it deserves our belief or it deserves to be taken for what it is. However, there is a completely different possibility to our thoughts and to how we can perceive or, think about our thoughts. Now, metacognition, if you have to look at the definition, it literally means thinking about thinking. And it's one of the most important human capacities. Um, More accurately, if you had to, say, define what metacognition is, it would be being aware of our own mental processes while they are happening. So, because of this ability that we have as human beings, it allows us to notice thoughts rather than automatically becoming them. And And, as we've been saying, that this as a skill has the capacity to strengthen every other skill that we've learned about, because it allows us to observe our patterns. Now, we could think, and a lot of us, we are guilty of saying that I am like this, or I've been doing this for 20 years, I can't change it, or, this is my strength, this is my weakness. We've created beliefs about ourselves. And not just beliefs about ourselves, we've also created sort of um, almost programmed reactions to certain triggers in our lives. So we end up maybe making the same kind of choices in relationships, at work. We react the same way when it comes to, say, facing criticism or facing injustice. And we could have the same kind of anxieties about the future. And we can tend to think that I am now a victim of my own mind, because I am like this, I cannot act, feel, think, behave differently. Metacognition, the best thing that it does to us if we develop and strengthen this skill is that through metacognition we can observe our pattern before we act on it. And it's only by observing and becoming aware of something that we will have then the ability to change it. Also, if we think about it, just consider how much of the day is spent in internal dialogue. Most of the time, we are talking within ourselves. We are either planning, remembering, we are predicting the future, we are comparing, we are imagining. And again, most of this is happening automatically. So the challenge is not that we are not thinking, we are thinking more than we realize we are thinking. Uh, the challenge is that we become so completely identified with what we think. There is no distance, no pause, there's no observation. And metacognition, it creates that distance. So, what is the quality of a thought? It's it's sort of an event happening in the mind, right? Um, it's it's not an instruction. So if we can then think about what a thought is not, it is not necessarily true, it is not necessarily useful, it is not necessarily important, or it's even not necessarily that sometimes requires action. And a lot of our thoughts arise because of memories, of our habits, emotions, where we are giving our attention to, stress, and many, many unconscious processes. So, through observing our thoughts, we can start asking maybe two questions. Is this thought true? Is this thought helpful? Is this thought true, or is this thought helpful? And when we check in with ourselves, say there is a sticky thought, or there's something that doesn't seem to leave us, um, especially when we have anxious thoughts, uh, asking ourselves if this thought is true, asking ourselves if this thought is helpful, can help us decide whether we want to continue to follow that thought or not. And we will be practicing that going ahead. But just knowing that can really help us, because we also know that the mind has certain habits. It, it has a habit of predicting. My life is downhill from here. That's a prediction. We don't know. We can't even predict, if say um, a very if say even weather forecast, even with all the technology we have, cannot sometimes really predict if it's going to rain or not. So, but we feel like we can predict all our lives. And we use in our daily lives a lot of thoughts that are predictions. The mind also has a habit of worrying. We know that, so many thoughts that are old worries or habitual worries. The mind has a habit of comparing. The mind has a habit of telling stories because it wants to fill gaps and it searches for certainty. So, whenever there is a gap in understanding, whenever there is a gap in, say, whenever there is an ambiguity in a situation, or, we are put across, say, a person or an event or a circumstance where we don't know the details, the mind, as a habit, will create something that will help us see sense in the event or a conversation or whatever it is. And these can be helpful. So it's not like something is wrong if the mind is doing that. They are simply functions of the thinking mind. But as an observer, we can notice these habits without becoming trapped inside them. So, say, when we start filling gaps, we can objectively tell ourselves that, yeah, I know that these are facts. And the other things that the mind is now telling me is just what the mind does to fill gaps because it does not want ambiguity. And again, having that kind of objectivity to what is a fact and what is a story can create distance between me and this story that I've come up with very smartly or very creatively to make sense of an event. Now, um, through this through the lives and throughout the modules, we've been working with emotions, with reactions, we've been learning resilience, mindfulness, but all of these things link to one thing, and that is the moment of noticing. So whether it's more emotional regulation, whether it's more moving from reactivity to, say, responding, whether it's building resilience and mindfulness as a practice in itself, these are all focused on that one moment. Now, they all depend on that one moment of noticing. I notice I'm becoming defensive. I notice I'm catastrophizing. I notice I'm assuming the worst. And this noticing itself changes the experience because while the thought remains, it's not disappeared, awareness has entered. And that grip that the worry has had on us or the anxiety has had on us, the grip that, say, distress has had on us, we can loosen it a bit by being defensive because we are now looking at what is happening very objectively. And we are not saying that because I'm feeling this way, this is true. Now, there is, however, a difference between awareness and analysis. Please tell me if I'm going too fast, or if you'd like to understand anything again. You want me to repeat something? You want me to give an example? Um, so the difference between awareness and analysis, which again is really important to understand because we can fall in the trap of analyzing, is that awareness is objective. Awareness tells us this is what is happening. This is how I'm feeling. This is how I'm reacting. These are the facts. These are the stories. When we get into analyzing, we start asking questions. Why am I like this? Why am I again feeling anxious when I work so hard on myself? Um, why does life, always put me in this position? Now, analysis, while it has its place, constant analysis often, it's just another way of keeping us trapped in thought. So when we are checking in, it's good to make sure that we are not falling into the trap of analysis, because awareness is much simpler, it's cleaner. It's not getting trapped in stories or why me or why this life or when and how. It's just telling us this is what it is. And um, and it stays away from any emotion about it. Emotion is what we are observing. Awareness in itself is not creating emotion. Observation, or the ability to observe ourselves, um, is curious, because we have a certain inquisitiveness. We are curious about what is going on inside me. How am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I believing? What it is not is that it's not critical. So when we begin observing ourselves, we can often become harsh, because like, say we are thinking a lot of thoughts of catastrophizing, say for example, and we're not aware that we are catastrophizing. So while inside there is anxiety and we are tense, um, in our bodies, we are tense in our minds, that tension becomes very familiar to us. And we can comfortably, in a way, until it gets out of hand, we can become comfortable in living with that tension inside us. It becomes the new normal. And you can see a lot of people, say with stress. Stress has become such an overused word, and such a commonly felt reaction in the body, in the mind, that if you're not stressed, we feel like, oh my God, is there something I'm missing, or is there something I'm not attending to? So when we start observing ourselves, the risk is that now we are so much more aware of our catastrophizing or our stressor. And it can lead us to really judge ourselves. Oh, I'm doing this again, or I should not be thinking this. I failed again. But criticism is simply another thought, right? The observer is objective, it notices. Only with an attitude of curiosity, there is no condemnation. And if we find ourselves using our observation to criticize, judge, demean, condemn ourselves, then we are not really observing. So differentiating between the two, between analysis and observation, and between judgment and observation, and making sure that in the garb of more mindfulness or of more observation, we are not harming ourselves even further by being harsh um, with ourselves. And the last thing that probably I want to talk about today is that when we speak of metacognition, or when we speak about thinking about thinking, we are not talking about stopping thoughts. It's not a practice to empty the mind. It's not a practice to become permanently calm. It's not intended for those purposes. The real purpose of metacognition is freedom. Because the moment we recognize that this thought has appeared, after that, I get to decide what I do with it. So it gives me complete control on how I want to treat that thought. Do I want to follow it? Do I want to soothe it? Does it need comfort from me? Does it need some kind of reassurance? Does it need an affirmation? Does it need action? It just gives me a choice, which I did not have earlier. So, metacognition really is that moment of choice, and that moment of choice changes everything, because it changes our relationship to our thoughts and our feelings. Yeah, thanks for being patient, for listening. I'd like to end it with a tool, which is it's called Notice. The acronym is Notice, and we can use these 6 steps as a practice to to be more in touch with what's happening. So if you happen to get emotionally activated, you can pause briefly and move through these 6 steps. So the N of Notice stands for notice. What thought has just appeared? What thought triggered me, or what thought made me a little uncomfortable? The O of Notice is for observe. What is happening in my body? And we know that the body reacts very quickly to thoughts. Sometimes the body reacts even faster than our thoughts do. We can start feeling something without even being in touch with what thought has created that tension in the body, or the racing heart or the shortness of breath. So notice, observe. The T is for take one slow breath. Create a small pause. And in earlier practices as well, we practice the pause. I is for inquire. What do you inquire? Is this thought helping me right now? Is this a helpful thought? The C of Notice is for choose. What action with the thought do I want to choose at this moment? What response aligns with the person I want to be? What do I want to do with this thought? And the last E is for engage. We act from that choice rather than from the first impulse that comes up. So, with these 6 steps, if we use them even just once a day to deal with, say, emotionally activating thoughts or experiences, we can slowly learn to be more present with how we are feeling. And also, it gives us, the ability to choose our next steps. So I hope you can practice that, with with a situation or with something that you find challenging. Um, I just, want to end with a short practice. So if you can, sitting, settling down, closing your eyes, if that's okay. And then once you feel like you're comfortable, you are soft in your body, your breath is settled, imagine sitting beside a gently flowing river. A nice warm day. And on the surface of the river, leaves are floating by. Now imagine that each thought that arises during the next few minutes is gently placed on a leaf. So you're not pushing the thought away or holding on to it. You simply notice the thought and then place it on a leaf. And then watch it drift downstream. Another thought appears, another leaf. A memory comes up. You can place it on the leaf and watch it drift by. Planning can go on a leaf. Any worries can go on a leaf. And notice how you remain sitting on the riverbank while the thoughts come and go. You can leave them. You can watch them go by. And connecting back with your breath. And then slowly and gently, you can open your eyes. And yeah, thanks for practicing with me. Thanks for being here. Tomorrow as well, we'll be taking um, metacognition further. And we'll be practicing, we'll be getting into, more tools that we can use and how we can strengthen and develop the skill even further. So, yeah, that's what I had for today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for practicing. And thank you, Vardini, for your comment. I wish you and I wish everyone a great day, great evening. And we'll be back tomorrow on Mighty Champions Daily Live. See you then.